Share, yeah.
Yeah, it's recording now.
Okay. Share screen. Oh, okay. Okay, shall we start?
Yep.
Okay. So during this presentation, I will start the discussion on what type of post-COVID economy we can expect. I have prepared these slides. I hope it will be useful. So according to this ONS report, Office of National Statistics report, in the month of April, the national income fell by something like 20%. This is an index. And according to a report by OECD, it expects the UK economy to shrink by 11.5% due to COVID. Now, once it is all over, Keynesian economics are likely to say economy shrank because of the demand shock. Neoclassical economics are likely to come and say it is because of the supply shock. Both these views assumes that the economy is naturally in equilibrium and the free market forces will make the economy in equilibrium. What does that equilibrium means? The economy has a tendency to be in a stable state of achieving growth rate of something like 2 to 3% per annum, which they call natural growth rate. Otherwise, these shocks only divert the economy temporarily from this. If left on its own, economy will achieve this 3% growth rate. But this is not a very good explanation. A better one is this idea. COVID-19 was a tipping point. This idea of the tipping point can be explained by these sand piles. If you put on the sand pile, the slope keeps on increasing, and a particular stage, a particular sand grain can make the whole sand pile collapse. And therefore, this COVID is only a tipping point. Economy was basically an unstable thing. So, and therefore, this is economics will argue that this is something that is unknown, but actually it was not this, COVID was not an unknown. In early 2018, at a meeting of the WHO, World Health Organization, a group of experts discussed disease X is likely to come. And this is likely to originate in the animals. So this unknown disease X, we can say, is COVID-19. Rob Wallace, a social biologist, has suggested that it is these pathogens or viruses or pandemics originate is part and parcel of our culture, and it is caused by it. It emerges in wildlife, jumps into humans, and spreads through trade routes. And thanks to deforestation, road building, land clearing for agriculture development, etc., its frequency has increased in the recent decades. It is not a shock at all. Now, supply shockers say investors are not investing. Demand shock, the Keynesians will say people and business don't spend on travel, service, etc. So the demand shock is causing the shrinkage of the economy. Now, from what we discussed, we can see that, and from what we know, the cause of the current crisis for the UK economy has been the search for profit in agriculture and nature, which has resulted in this COVID, and the weak state of capitalist production in 2020. These 2 points are origins in the way capitalist production is organized. Basically, we have to look at the supply side of the economy. What do you find there? Socialization of production, but privatization of products and the surplus of the society. Now, the UK government's response to the present COVID crisis has been increased spending. So this is a Keynesian response. It is the same as what happened after the 2008 Great Recession. But later in 2010, the Cameroon government said we cannot afford it and started austerity. The reason advanced was that the public sector debt is unsustainable. It had increased from about 45% to about 85%. But we know the real reason was to make the labor cheap to help profitability. So tax cuts was offered to the rich and corporations, cuts in public infrastructure like NHS, schools, care sector, etc., and privatization of the economy. And what did this austerity did to us? It reduced unemployment. But those employment created were of a precarious type of jobs, which is referred now as the gig economy. 60,000 hospital beds were lost. 30,000 vacancies are unfilled in the NHS. Something like 100,000 jobs are to be filled in the care sector. Breadlines increased, homelessness increased, inequality of income has also increased. And economy did not recover, or the recovery was weak. Public sector debt did not decrease. And basically, the neoliberal policies did not work at all. The UK health system was made incapable of dealing with the pandemic. This graph shows that after 2008, we can see these national income growth rates. They were very, very low. This is where you say recovery as compared to the earlier period. The recovery was very, very weak. The public debt, so we see here, this is from 1995. So even Labour government was following the reduction of public debt, cutting down austerity, and they had achieved that. They had declared it, they want to bring it down below 40. And 2008, it was around this 40, 45. Then, in spite of the austerity measures, public debt has not come down at all. Now, let me discuss what have we learned from the COVID-19 and what can we do about this. One thing we have learned is that resources is not a problem for us. The Tory government's arguments was that public debt is a problem. We don't have the resources. Austerity because we need to use scarce resources efficiently. These austerity measures, according to a study undertaken by UCL, has shown that there have been 120,000 excess deaths due to austerity. And COVID-19 is supposed to have led to 60,000 excess deaths. So this created a fear, and they looked for resources and they found them. So resource is not a problem. That is what we have learned. But what is the problem? Ideology is the problem. Second, private sector, that is free market, is incapable of dealing with crisis. Public transport failed. Railways, for example, is being partly renationalized. Now there are reports that some universities are going to fail, like SOAS, it seems, is going to fail down. I also heard a report, these were discussed in our university circles, that LSE is also going to be in great trouble because they have a large number of foreign students. A third thing we have learned is the solidarity of the people. People have come together. People came together to help each other. About 4.5
sanitizer report your card was working fine? That they made me also do, when I came there.
Okay.
No, in VHS also I did.
Then which the camera cannot open? How?
Huh?
To open the start camera cannot.
Camera not open.
So what
No,
have we learned
something
from
wrong with that.
COVID-19? We have learned very important thing about us. That is solidarity of the people. People have come together to help each other. They have formed a large number of groups to help each other. And a report today I saw in the BBC by UK Cares says that there are 4.5 million unpaid care providers. They are basically helping their relatives. They left their homes to help their elderly and sick relatives. And another important thing is we learned the important significance of the key workers.
Camera set kar do.
So what can be done? So these are some of my. We need to replace growth rate of GDP as a measure of wellness of society.
Not my camera, my laptop camera.
So actually, what is that? Melvin, can you mute?
Something went on. Everyone.
Need to replace growth of GDP as a measure of the wellness of society. We could replace it by quality of air, water, availability of leisure time, etc. Can replace this concept of GDP as the measure of the health of the economy and the goodness or wellness of society. A second thing we want is a new Green Deal. There is a huge area where new investment can take place, like green jobs, clean power, and we can, even this way also we can achieve growth and clean nature at the same time. Third, increase investment in infrastructure and R&D, especially in the pharmaceutical sector. Rate of interest is now almost zero. It is not 0.1%. So can borrow and invest in capacity building Indian natures, schools, etc. A fourth thing we should demand is free connectivity. We have learned in these times of lockdown, connectivity is so important. We could do schooling, university teaching, socializing, all this. So we need to get free connectivity. Remember, this was already thought of party and they have included this in their manifesto. Now, many people are going to lose their jobs. Since tourism, travel, etc. will be curtailed for the medium term, a lot of people will be jobless, but there is no, we can be retrain them and deployed them, give them a small training and can be deployed in the schools, and we can make our education classrooms smaller and which is generally considered good. And what is the likely scenario? What can we expect? We can say that in the immediate future, that is immediately austerity is likely to be curtailed because there is no general, there is people are demanding more health, etc. So therefore it is likely to be curtailed. But after 2 years, again, the problem of public sector will be raised. Now, some people think it is now gone up, or by the end of the austerity, it will go up from something like 85% to 125% of the GDP. And they are likely to say this is unsustainable, and then austerity will be brought back, likely to be brought back. Resistance is the key. So it depends, in my opinion, very much upon the resistance. There are some signs of hope. During the last 1 year, there has been a substantial significant in the trade union membership. Then anti-racist struggles have also picked up because the austerity were, victims of austerity were the BAME sector, black minority, ethnic minority were the victims. It affected them. There's also other struggles against inequality pandemic and racism pandemic. Also struggles are picking up. Overall, now we are coming to the concluding part of this. Free markets have been exposed. Advantages of free market. Free market is main argument for the free market is it is cheap and a quick method to process information. Information, a component of a decision making. important. The decision by the market is better than, let us say, a group of experts sitting in a room and processing, collecting the information and processing them. So if this market can respond quickly to changes in the world, pandemics has proved once again that this is a false premise. Now algorithms have come up to process information quickly and cheaply. Another argument, individual freedoms that market gives. But we know there is no freedom unless we have some amount of income to exercise that freedom. Social media is already manipulating our information, changing our mind. It is time to look for alternative market. It is a time for creative destructions. Crises have been time for change. In UK, after the First World War and the Spanish flu, there is a spelling mistake here, increased women's participation in the economy and enfranchised them. Of course, suffragette movement was there, but a crisis and the shortage of labor at that time gave a push to the suffragettes movement. The Great Depression and the Second World War, there were also crises that led to the creation of NHS and the welfare state, along with the other factors that caused rise of the NHS and the welfare state. Recessions lead to more people going to the universities. In the 70s, there was a crisis, a shortage, and that led to more people going to the universities. When there are less jobs, people look towards these universities as an option to spend their time, to wait out. The dot-com bubble of 2000s led to destruction of some industries and creation of some new industries, which has been generally good. So this is an opportunity for change. Let us think of the opportunities for positive change in this pandemic has highlighted. So what we need is to struggle for stronger public health, reduced and unnecessary commuting, less pollution and green jobs and green energy, free connectivity, international pharmaceutical cooperation, and also, of course, increasing the pay as well as recognition for key workers. So there is an opportunity now for the governments, if they are willing, to crack down on tax havens and taxing big corporations properly. So let us all do our bit to turn this pandemic into an opportunity for good. Let us all fight and vote for it. Thank you very much. I have ended my presentation. Gone down to 6 chats. Okay.
Thank you, Thomas. That was good.
Okay, let's start a discussion.
How do you think this will affect BAME communities who are like already, people in the BAME communities, they're working in low-paid jobs and face inequality?
Yeah, what is the question? How to solve that problem?
How do you think this will affect BAME communities, minority, Black, Asian, and ethnic minority communities?
Yeah, it will affect everybody, I guess.
But they'll be hit especially hard, won't they? Because they're already on, they already work low-paid jobs.
Yeah, correct. They will be more affected. And as the death has shown that they are more deaths have been from that community.
Tom, just in your talk, you referred that Tory government, and before the Tory government, Labour also, most of the governments declared that public debt is basically some sort of a issue, some sort of a problem that needs to be tackled.
Yeah.
So from a theoretical perspective, different perspectives, why is public debt an issue? For example, if we look at Singapore, if we look at Japan, Japan has about 240% or 250% of the of public debt compared to what their GDP is. Similarly, Singapore has very high public debt. So we can't say the Japanese economy or Singaporean economy is a failing economy. So
Yeah.
why is, I mean, and similarly, if we compare Afghanistan, Afghanistan has about 10% of public debt compared to what is their GDP. So why is public debt portrayed as some sort of a unique menace which needs to be tackled by various governments? I'm not talking only about the Tory government, but the Labour government, pre-Labour government also portrayed public debt as such. So why is that the reason? Theoretically, why is that the
Yeah,
reason?
this
And
is
then ideologically, what is the reason?
Yeah, so public debt should not be a problem for a growing economy. For example, if the government borrows and invests in infrastructure, the theoretical point is that if it uses, it will pay for itself. So it should not be a problem. So public debt, current expenditure, which is called revenue expenditure, and the capital expenditure, you make a distinction. So when you use it for paying back the rate of interest, you paying the interest payment, that is a problem. So over a period of time, then you have to pay the debt repayment becomes a big problem and it accumulates over a period of time. And then there is not enough money for spending for revenue payment, upkeep of institutions, paying the salaries, maintenance, etc. That is a theoretical problem. Now, what is that sustainable amount of sustainable public debt? It is something like 60%. This is again a theoretical position. And that 60% is arrived at by taking an average of all the European Union countries when they made this regulation or passed a resolution in the European Parliament called Growth and Stability Pact. So they said it should be 60%. So if you want to join the European Union as a member, you should be, your public debt should be 60%. Otherwise, theoretically, the problem is that if your debt, if your interest payment, interest and principal payment takes away a huge amount of tax that is collected, will not be available for spending money. That is the problem. That is the theoretical problem.
Okay.
But in
Thank
a
you.
growing economy,
Yeah,
it should
that's
not be a problem. And the debt management, the correct method of managing is to impose the taxes. We are having the problem because in 2010, Cameroon government gave something like 100 billion tax concessions to the corporations. That was a problem. So now for Britain, it should not be a problem because we are not taxing the huge multinationals. We are not taxing big industries like Virgin, these tax havens. Okay. So we are not taxing insufficiently the financial transactions. So
okay. I mean, on this particular point, a bit of further clarification. The public debt is generally an internal debt, right? The
yeah,
debt taken by the government. Now, public debt generally, as far as I know, is generated by two means. One, the government issues certain bonds, right?
yeah.
So the government issues certain bonds, or it can go to sort of international or supranational organizations like IMF or World Bank and so on and so forth, and
Yeah.
take the direct debt loans from them, right? So if the government is issuing the bonds, who is the government paying the interest to? I mean, I can understand if the government is taking the loans from the international bodies like IMF or World Bank and so on and so forth, then sure, they have to pay the interest to them. And in that case, what you explained, that the interest, if the interest becomes more than a particular amount of the tax collected, then that becomes an issue because of obvious reasons. But in the first case, when the government debt is generated by issuing the bonds by the government, then who is the government paying interest to?
So this government issues the debt, it can be bought by anybody, central bank. So you also buy some national securities. So the central bank pays, and central bank in turn sells this to the other commercial banks. and even pension funds, anybody can put. And also the rate of interest can be very low. Now, for example, the rate of interest is so low, government can borrow at that rate and invest. There's no problem at all. So the government is keeping the rate of interest quite high, and that is why the debt burden is increasing. And internal debt, like UK had an internal debt, it was not a problem at all. This is a problem. It is not a problem. It was a measure to, in my opinion, it was a measure to cut down the government expenditure, cut down to bring about austerity. And thus, what austerity has done is has made the labor very cheap.
So are you basically saying that
it's made
when
the profitability? Yeah, in
Sure.
my opinion, and generally people think that austerity was not required for UK, but it was very convincing for the public because people equated private debt with public debt, etc. And government could postpone. Government could, when the time comes, government can issue new bonds and go on to the future. So it's not a problem. When it only foreign like Greece and Portugal, their public foreign debt was very high. For UK, it was not a problem. It was the victory of neoliberalism in the ideological war.
Thanks, Ram. Yeah, it's clear. Thank you. Thanks.
And also, it is thought that public debt, if it increases, a good amount of it will be monetized. So public debt is also like creating an asset. That asset can be used to create more money in the economy.
Thomas, can I just ask?
That's
You know,
little bit technical.
when
Yeah.
you're suggesting the alternative forms of investment into green economies, etc., are you saying that the state should invest in them, or are you saying that the private sector should continue
both
to invest?
Both can invest. Private, they can be given incentives to invest. Private sector. The state also can invest, but huge incentives can be given, just like housing sector. For example, solar power.
So if the private sector continue to invest in the manner in which it's so invested in other products, then there's no reason why inequality needs to decrease, is there?
Yeah, correct. But why not have a cooperative type of investments, different type of firms? Corporations is only one form in which firms are organized. Unfortunately, that is the most prevailing one. But we could also organize in a cooperative way. There is a cooperative society in UK, isn't it? Cooperative bank. And Paul knows more about it. There is alternative ways of organizing firms.
Right.
Can I ask?
Yeah, I have answered to all the questions. Let's have a discussion rather than have a.
Just one question about, you know, when I mean, one of your early first or second graph, when it was obvious that as soon as the lockdown came, the economic will fall quite quickly in UK.
Yeah.
It will drop 20% or whatever, 14%.
Yeah.
Why have they taken that option? I mean, today they were talking about same sort of thing on the news. When they knew by locking down, the economy is going to suddenly drop significantly,
Yes.
or constriction will be quite high, why have they gone for that option? Is that because of the difficulty ideologically accepting the balance between the health versus economy, if you like?
Yeah, in my opinion, they try to delay it. Today, the Ferguson has said it should have been locked up 2 weeks before.
Yeah. So they didn't really want to do the lockdown anyway because they were aware of this economic crash that's likely to come.
I think they did it because there was a great pressure. There was a great fear at that time. You may recall at that time there was a great fear from what was happened in China and Italy, etc. There was a great fear. So most probably they thought it is only going to be for 2 or 3 weeks. And it is a short thing and we can come back. Yes,
Can I
Paul.
just go back to the point about public debt? And people speak about public debt as it's some sort of standalone concept, but it's not. Public debt is always contextualized. You can't speak about public debt without the context. And so the question is, who actually owns the debt? And what do they do with it? And why do they do it? So, for example, consider Greece about 10 to 5 years ago, which built up enormous public debt. And you saw what happened to Greece when the international monetary funds and the various technocrats went about dismantling Greece and selling off its public assets to pay off debt. So the question about public debt is not a question in itself. The question is, when is it occurring? Who actually owns it? And what's being done about it? So without these concrete questions, any debate about public debt is academic. Public in many countries, public debt has destroyed economies, destroyed welfare, and destroyed healthy living. When you get half your public revenues being paid back in interest charges annually, it means that that people cannot flourish. So the question is, in Britain's, in UK's case, we have this public debt, and the question then becomes, how is it going to be managed? And that's the issue, the actual management of public debt, not the debt itself. Do you see the difference?
Yeah, that is the point. Yeah, correct.
That doesn't matter if it's managed correctly for the right reasons, but if it's managed correctly for the wrong reasons, we have a problem.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely relevant.
That is the point. That's the point.
Yeah.
Correct.
Surinder raised a very important point. I think that needs to be explored a bit more. That is, if we talked about investment in green economy and so on and so forth, and if the private corporations are going to invest, there is no incentive for them to not sort of extract profit out of their investments. And if that is the case, which is obviously is going to be the case, which is obviously is the case in most of the investments, private investments, then how is the inequality going to decrease? And related to that, can we ask a question that is the capitalist framework able to provide solution for shocks, sort of systemic shocks like this? Has it got any tools? Has it got capacity to provide, except the band-aid sort of solutions? Has it got some sort of systemic measure to rectify these particular issues, address these issues?
But
I don't know.
But what I'm suggesting is, why not think about cooperatives? The idea of the word Soviet itself means cooperation, isn't it? Cooperatives. So we could be done on a cooperative basis. Can't we explore that rather than having a centralized authority making the decision? So in a future society, we'll have to make a compromise between these two, a centralized authority and a decentralized decision making. So my model here is that many activities can be done decentralized in the new way when we organize. For example, many solar companies can exist. But the research part of it can be done by the government, technology part of it. So many activities will be done by private sector people who can cooperate, not purely working based on the profit basis. So one main problem with the Soviet Union centralized organization was that a few people making the decisions can go wrong. Here, large amount of information can be collected, and many decisions can be, whatever decisions can be made at the decentralized level, that can be done. So we can avoid that conflict, in my opinion. So decisions should be made where the better processing of the information can be done.
Has anyone seen that famous Lucasfilm, the Lucasfilm, making military aircraft machinery, went into a downturn in the 80s. But the workers, and it's quite a famous story, and they just produced a film about it. All the workers just got together across all the British, well, I think it's British aerospace sites, not Lucas, British aerospace sites, and they put together plans to produce electricity from solar panels and the like. In other words, they had the capability and capacity and the engineering and the tooling to produce socially desirable products. And they tried very hard to get the government to agree to this. Of course, it was eventually refused. And we've seen, haven't we? We've seen in the virus epidemic, a number of fleet-footed firms have managed to convert their production lines to producing ventilators. So it's quite possible that the existing facilities, existing network of companies, under the right direction, the right management schemes, could in fact produce socially desirable products. All this is a matter of political will.
Yes.
It's about political will of those who control the politics, those who control Parliament in the UK's case. Nothing is impossible. Every combination of socially productive activity is possible. It requires political will. It's as simple as that.
Yes, that is correct. So in my opinion, there is a huge investment possible, and there is a sense of willingness on the part of the people because of the realization that we have harmed the nature, and that is causing these pandemics. So if we had the right government, this would have been the correct time for us to change.
Have people heard of the Plimsoll kids? You're not old enough to know it, but the Plimsoll kids, and Tom referred to this in one of his OAPs. The Plimsoll kids were so named because at the commencement of World War II in Britain, 1939-1940, many working class kids from the cities like London were sent into the countryside. And they arrived in the depths of winter wearing what are called plimsolls. You know, plimsolls, these old canvas shoes.
Yeah.
Canvas shoe with rubber sole. They had no socks, they just wore plimsolls. So they were called the plimsoll kids. Very unsuitable footwear for winter, and that's all they had. And the plimsoll kids was become a metaphor for the middle classes discovering poverty. Until they had exposure to all these working class kids from the slums of London, they didn't really know about poverty and inequality. To them, it was all invisible. And there's this great awakening of conscience and concern about the discovery of poverty. Kids arrived with lice, they arrived half-starved, they had no clothes. They discovered that poverty is endemic, but it had been hidden until World War II and the evacuations of kids into middle-class households. And this set off a train of events which ended up with a welfare state in 1946, 47, 48, as you mentioned, Tom, in your OHP. So sometimes in catastrophes, a window opens up in which, with the right-minded people and the right circumstances, you can make massive progress. And there's a sense that the current demonstrations against racism might be an example of that. Who knows where this is going? It may go nowhere, it may peter out, but maybe it will bring in major changes. And this refers to a famous analysis by a French philosopher called Badiou, a post-Marxist, when he described that every so often in world history, the world unfreezes, and for a short period of time during this melting point, and there's a chance to change things. Very often, of course, the opportunity is missed and it refreezes. The chance is gone. So this is a moment when things become unfrozen. The issue is what can be done before it refreezes, before it's too late. I don't suppose a Zoom conference is going to make much difference about it, but who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. Correct.
I have a question.
Yeah, not question.
So, the last recession took about 8 years to recover.
Yeah.
Right. But that was more of an endogenous cause. It was a systemic problem. Whereas this one, we are having an exogenous event has come in.
Yeah.
How long do you think this will take for the economy to recover? Because in the sense, a lot of firms haven't just exited, they're just not operating. And if the economy can come back to normal,
Yeah.
a large proportion can come back pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah.
So do you think this would last as long as the previous one, despite it being a much worse dip?
Yeah. So there is a discussion on this, whether it will be like a V type, sudden going down, come up, or it will be like in 1987. But what I feel is that this is, there's a discussion going on where this recovery would be like, or recovery will take a long time. In my opinion, the recovery will take a long time for the UK economy. The reason for that is our economy has been very weak. So because of the uncertainty that has been created, because of the Brexit, a lot of private investment that would have taken place did not take place. A lot of public investment that should have been taken place has not taken place because of this overemphasis on public debt. So this is going to be, in my opinion, it is going to take a long time to come back to the normal level. What is the normal level? Using our idea of GDP growth rate of something like 2%, between 2 to 3%. In my opinion, this is from my reading of the UK economy, this is going to take a long time. From our readings further, we know during the decades, as compared to China or as compared to US economy, we have spent less money on research and development.
But don't you think the government
So productivity has fallen. Yeah.
But don't you think the government has put in a lot more resources this time to keep the economy going? Because I think America is spending double of what they did in the 2008 recession.
Yeah, there is a very good opportunity if we change this direction to grow. Especially in the Green Deal. If you have a Green Deal, like the New Deal or the Keynesian deal, if we have a good deal, there is a good possibility of a very fast recovery. We should not worry about the debt at all. Debt is just an excuse. Internal debt that UK is having is not a problem at all. So this growth and stability pact, when the European Union said you should bring it down to 60%, but then UK was saying we want to bring it down to below 40%. What was the logic behind it? It is actually that we were one step ahead in implementing, as compared to other European countries, we were one step ahead in implementing neoliberal policies and following austerity policies.
Let us not forget. Let us not forget.
Can I ask another?
Not everybody.
Yeah.
In this virus. Okay, there have been many, many winners, and the winners have been the big multinationals who've taken very generous loans from governments to reinforce their war chests. Do not pretend that everyone has suffered. The big .com companies like Google and so on and so forth are making billions of dollars weekly out of the virus.
Yes.
In fact, you could argue, of course, that the whole approach to the economic support given by Johnson to the UK economy actually only supports employers, it supports big business. It doesn't support poor people, does it? You know, this furlough scheme, for example, is a big con. I personally know people who have been furloughed by their rich firms and didn't have to be. You know, the furlough scheme is designed to freeze the status quo, so that when things change, we can go back to what's called normality. In other words, how it used to be. And let's not pretend that there's widespread losers in this process. On the contrary, a lot of companies are taking a big advantage of the situation and will end up richer as a consequence.
Okay. Kalpana?
Yeah, sorry, I think it most probably follows from what was said. One of the other things people talk about is the interest rate. And everybody's saying it's good to borrow at the moment because interest rates are so slow or so low.
Yeah.
But what happens if it starts to rise? And how do they know it's going to remain low for years to come? I mean, will that have impact on the recovery?
No, interest rate, if you are borrowing now, the interest rate will be fixed, isn't it? You are borrowing at that particular.
Yeah, it's very low at the moment, yeah.
It is very low at the moment because there is no opportunity to invest.
Okay.
Huge amount of money is available looking for investment, like pension funds. So many other insurance funds. These funds are available. We should borrow them and invest them.
Can I just
Yeah.
make a point? If you're talking about climate change and other issues, the people will argue that any sort of growth is completely unsustainable, and that's one of the reasons why we're facing these pandemics as well. So I'm just wondering how one factors that into whatever demand you're making.
Yeah, but is it possible to have, let us say, when you replace fossil fuels with, let us say, renewable energy, will it not be a good idea to achieve that growth?
Of course, I'm talking about growth of the economy. And this is one of their arguments, that continual growth is unsustainable.
Yeah, if you can have that type of growth without harming the nature, that type of growth. So will it harm the economy? Will it harm the nature without harming the nature? In my opinion, it should be fine. We could now we are achieving through the supply chain, which is harming the economy. So that could be curtailed. Yeah, that is my opinion on that. We have to think about it. What are those sustainable type of energy? Just today, I just read an article that the pollution actually, nearly United States, 40% of pollution is caused by their army. The army is causing the main pollution. Their planes, they're not carrying, they're just practicing and keep their army. And that is causing these are the ones we can cut down. All the bombs, the amount of pollution that is causing the nature. The cars, for example, could be replaced by, let us say, sustainable energy. And that cars again, those again can be replaced by public transport. So it must be possible, in my opinion, to replace this idea of fossil fuel powered growth with green power. Okay, I don't have all the answers. You can have a discussion. I just presented some ideas. I just collected. Where is Naim? Naim gone.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Thomas, you started by saying that the corona crisis was in itself significant, but that seems to me to be a bit counterintuitive, because the corona crisis resulted in the whole economy shutting down.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, my company, the whole company shut down for 6 weeks, and then now it's only opened up with about 1/6 or 1/5 of the shops opening, and even they are not performing well. They're performing less than 20% of their output. So really, for 12 weeks, we've had the company is working under less than 10% of its output. So that's a big catastrophe, isn't it?
Yeah, that is caused by corona, you are saying.
Yeah, that's caused by corona. That is not because of the inherent underlying problems of capitalism.
Yeah.
I know the corona crisis itself is exacerbated by capitalism.
Yes.
And in fact, brought about by continual growth, basically.
Yeah, yeah, correct.
But it is something that has actually caused a catastrophe.
Yeah, correct. So these both are linked together. One aspect I said about is that the debt problem, the austerity, etc., led to the closing because NHS had some excess capacity. The Germany coped with the corona crisis because they had excess capacity.
Yeah.
So our NHS also had some excess capacity, something like 60,000 beds. They say the data say that was closed down. So there was no place to take these people. That's why they had to create these new hospitals, spending millions of pounds. So if this type of efficiency claim and closing down these hospitals had not resulted, we could have coped up well. And the economy closed down. Actually, the reason for closing down, they said, was that they didn't want to overwhelm the NHS. If NHS is overwhelmed, then the whole health system will collapse. This was the argument. If we were prepared, we could deal with it. Just like any other disease coming, the shutdown need not be for such a long time. So I feel it is related. On the one hand, the growth idea. Second, the unpreparedness of the public health system because of the austerity that we implemented from 2010 onwards. That especially the loss of beds, care sector. Why did so many people die in the care sector?
Yeah.
So because we, something like 1,000, I heard this from John McDonald, he gave a talk. He was saying that care sector, the Resolution Foundation has put out this data. 1,000 jobs are there in the care sector. This is not being filled.
Yeah.
So that is why 1/3 of the people died is there in the care sector. So if our health system austerity was not there, in my opinion, we would have been better prepared to deal with it. We had a robust, in spite of UK as having a very good health system compared to the US, austerity has proved that it has a good bit of it is dismantled. Now, I learned that they are putting up a new hospital near the QE, a private hospital. See, this is what they are suggesting. In between those two buildings, one new building is coming up. So they are planning to replace those extra beds by the private sector.
Amunka,
Yeah.
you mentioned during your speech that the optimal amount of public health for a country was 60% based on European data. Can you explain, do you have any idea why that specific figure?
Not public debt.
Yeah.
Public debt, when somewhere in 1990s, when I think it is in the 1990s, they formed the idea that countries, when they join together, from the 1990s, the idea of common currency came, the euro, the idea. So at that time, we had the European exchange rate mechanism. So if you join the European Union exchange rate mechanism, then your currency should not fluctuate. It should not fluctuate. And one of the reasons for currency fluctuation, exchange rate fluctuation, was the public debt. So public debt should be under control. So this was the thought. So at that time, they thought, what is the appropriate public debt? So at that time, they took an average of all the countries' public debt, and they said it should be 60. There is no scientific reason. I did not find any scientific reason, which was again close to that of Germany. So Germany's public debt. No other particular reason I have found. What is that particular rate of public debt? Public debt. I have read some academic articles, journal articles on this, something called fiscal stance. So the fiscal stance is, what is the sustainable fiscal stance over a long period of time? So this author, I forget the name, he has developed an index for this. And public debt, actually, according to that index, public debt, any amount doesn't matter. What matters is, what is the interest rate you pay? What is the interest you pay? That will decide the board. So it may be 200%. What is the interest rate you pay? For example, Saif mentioned about Japan. Japan, something like a negative interest rates they had. So the public debt is not a problem. You see, the amount is not a problem. So that 60% is not scientific. What scientific is that the idea that guy developed. I said about the fiscal stance index. The rate of interest is important. Inflation is important. And something called, there is a natural rate of interest. So combining all these things is important. So 60% is not, in my opinion, scientific at all. And then UK, what was this? Gordon Brown said, we want to bring it down to 40%. At that time, everybody agreed. Nobody is questioning these things because of our wisdom. And in the public mind, generally people are say that, that public debt is like private debt. And for an individual, we die and we should settle our debt before we die. But the nation doesn't die. The nation is a carrying on thing, and it can go on accumulating the debt. It can pay the debt. And in the 19th century, there was something called a console, and the debt is never returned. You may have read during George Osborne's time, there was some consoles issued in the 19th century. It was more than 100 years old. Their children, and he discontinued some. George Osborne's time, he said, we are paying off this. So that is, once you buy that loan, give that debt, give the loan to the government, you can, they continue to pay and for generations. You can give it to your children, they can give it to their children. So this is the idea. In my opinion, I did not find in my reading any scientific reason for 60%. The index is mattering, and that index, according to that construction, it should be around 1. Then it is sustainable for a long period of time.
So what do you think is going to happen with, well, we have about 25% reduction in GDP.
Yeah. No, that is of only 1 month.
That is only over 1 month. Yeah.
Yeah, this in month of April, that shrunk. Index.
Yeah, 20% April, and then if you take March and April together, it's about 25% so far. And it's probably going to either settle at that or come down a little bit.
Yeah, but it will recover. Maybe I read something like 15%.
Yeah.
15% over.
But even that is very high, isn't it? Because normally, even in a recession, the GDP only goes down by about 2%. That.
Yeah. This is very big shock.
Yeah. This is a big shock. So how do you foresee? I mean, if they continue in the traditional way they have managed capitalism.
Yeah. So I think still neoliberal ideology is still very strong.
Yeah. So if they continue in that neoliberal ideology, I mean, I think even Germany is affected by this.
Yeah.
Their GDP is going to go down as well. Maybe not as much as Britain, but it will still go down quite considerably.
Yeah, correct. So in my opinion, it is like it depends upon how the resistance will come up. How we are able to resist.
Okay, so what should be the demand of the resistance? I mean, what should we be asking for?
Since the revolution is not on the horizon, we can ask for a new Green Deal. We should demand a new Green Deal. And outsourcing is not a good idea at all. The PPEs was not here because we had to import them from Turkey or from China or from other countries. Yeah. So at least the elite will realize, we should realize that industrializing was not a good idea at all. So that is another area. Green industries is I am putting this thing on the green industries. I think generally people should raise a demand for a new Green Deal. There should be a solar panel on every housetop. And there should be cooperatives formed to do this. That is one thing I thought. This is my personal opinion. It's wild thinking.
Well, which was the Lucas alternative as well, Lucas plan.
But most probably at that time, there was not enough thinking at that time. Something that failed, after some time, it may become possible.
Yeah.
Now the people's mind have changed. May have changed.
I mean, there are lots of changes, isn't it? Because people have also realized
it is not possible, in my opinion, to go back to austerity again. It's already failed, and that is they're already elites have realized this. IMF itself had come out against it. So we should continue. Government should just spend the money now for the next 2-3 years. Then we should go for taxation. So the golden period of capitalism was 50s and 60s and some part of 70s. At that time, the tax rates were very high. And the capitalists were not doing so bad. So 80s and 90s, Thatcherist era, they said they are supposed to do well. I mean, suppose the economy ought to pick up, it has not picked up.
In the 1970s, tax rates in America were 85%.
Yeah, correct.
90% corporate tax and personal tax.
Yes.
It did not disincentivize capitalists, did it? The tax issue is a big red herring.
The trade unions were stronger as well.
Yeah.
Trade unions were very strong, and that is actually
talking from other side, from the other perspective. This is a great opportunity for disaster capitalism. If you look from their side, this is a brilliant opportunity for disaster capitalism. Focusing only on Britain, the low-income families have average saving of about £100. So if they allow to stretch this out for a couple of more months, most of the poor people would be on their knees, begging for, scraping for whatever jobs they can get for whatever money. And if the government colludes with the corporations and so on, so forth, which there is no reason why they shouldn't, and why won't they? This means a massive opportunity to make profit, massive opportunity for making profit, because they can also push down the minimum average wages and so on and so forth. Which, I mean, the average wages are already going down, but the minimum wages can also fall down.
It's already
So-
happening with British Airways. For British Airways, are demanding all their work. They're sacking vast numbers, so it's an opportunity to get rid of people. But secondly, they're demanding all their staff have new contracts written. Now they want to rewrite their contracts
Absolutely.
to their detriment. So, as you say, it's a great opportunity for capitalists to exploit the situation.
That's right.
That's going to happen. It's happening already.
Can I just also say that, we say that the heyday of capitalism was in the 1960s and 70s or even 50s, but, there was still huge poverty in the 50s. Poverty was seen to be rediscovered in the 50s. Also, the immigration legislation comes in the 60s and the 70s. And, poverty was still existing amongst both, Black people and minority groups and stuff, but also, within the working classes. So I don't really get this thing when economists and governments say, there was a peak period and now there's a drop. It doesn't actually make much difference to a lot of the people. So it doesn't make sense to me, except for capitalists.
I think it is a relative thing. It is a relative thing. Relative.
Well, even if it's not just relative, but if immigration was being reduced in the 60s because the rate of profit was going down, then it says something about capitalist growth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it contradicts that idea that capitalism was doing well in the 60s and 50s and 70s, doesn't it?
Well, it's called a boom period, Surinder, because in that period post-war, working class people managed to negotiate a relative rise in living standards. So for a period, there was a kind of a period when very, very poor people managed to raise their standard of living in Britain. Of course, it's not true for the rest of the world. The two are connected. So we talk about this heyday, the 50s and 60s. That's when working class people managed to get cars and refrigerators and TVs and all those kind of things. And they had much more leisure time and they had surplus cash. So it was a relative period of affluence for working class people, which petered out towards the end of the 70s. But as you point out, or imply, capitalism doesn't solve poverty, it causes poverty. As simple as that.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. Okay, shall we end our discussion?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Stop
thank you.
recording, Thomas.
Stop recording. Where is the
Thank you. Bye.